This is probably my favorite art story of all time. It's the craziest, funniest, most awe-inspiring story you'll ever hear involving copyright or trademark law, featuring a clever comics artist's brilliant Donald Duck parody getting threatened by Disney's lawyers, and the artist overcoming those legal troubles through just sheer audacious ingenuity. You won't believe how he solves this situation, actually through the comics medium. I absolutely love it when the little guy wins, and especially when that little guy is just a fantastic artist, and a fantastic smartass as well. So let's get into it. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it probably is, well, a duck, but this is not Donald Duck. Meet Arne Duck, a popular Swedish comics character who really loves a lot of stuff that Disney doesn't love. Sex, beer, complaining about capitalist pigs and cops, and puking and pissing in the street, to name a few. In order to properly appreciate the scope of this story, you first need to understand just how popular Donald Duck is in Scandinavia. When I was growing up in Norway as a child, I thought of Tuesdays as Donald Day, because every Tuesday I would get a new issue of Donald Duck and Company, then by far the most popular magazine in Norway. And I wasn't alone in calling Tuesday Donald Day. In 1986, Donald Duck & Co. in Norway had a weekly print run of 250,000 copies, for a population of around 4 million people at the time. That means over 6% of the population in Norway bought this comic book every week, which probably means something like 12% read it, since each issue was often read by several people in each household, including many adults, by the way. It was the same deal in Sweden and Denmark. And while Donald Duck has lost a lot of his popularity, especially among younger kids, the Donald-led annual Disney Christmas special is still considered almost holy in Scandinavia, and especially in Sweden, where more than 40% of the population tunes in. The ratings record in 1997 was over half the population. For a lot of people in Scandinavia, it basically isn't Christmas until you've watched Donald Duck. So this is the landscape that Arne Anka, as I knew him, stepped into when Charlie Christensen launched his one-page comic series in 1983. Under the pseudonym Alexander Barks, a riff on Carl Barks, the legendary artist widely recognized as probably the best interpreter of the Donald Duck character. Arne looks a lot like Donald Duck, but he certainly doesn't behave like Donald Duck. On the very first page published, Arne is horny after being single for 2 months. He stands in the street and screams into the void, "I want to fuck!" It isn't long before we see him peeing, smoking, calling a cop a fascist and kicking his cop car. His natural state is a constant cycle between wasted and hungover, and horny. But Arne Anka is not dumb, gross-out humor or controversy for controversy's sake. This comic is politically astute, philosophically rich, and a thoughtful, almost lyrical reflection on contemporary societal issues. In short, it's one of my favorite comics of all time. It's really, truly great. However, the Walt Disney Company doesn't quite see it that way. After Arne Anka grows in popularity and becomes one of the best-known comics in Sweden, in 1990, Arne's publisher Tago receives this letter from a law firm representing the Walt Disney Company's Nordic division based in Copenhagen. I'll translate the key parts. The Danish Disney Company owns all rights in the Nordic countries to Walt Disney's various characters, including Donald Duck. In blah 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 publication dated August 7, 1989, a character named Arne Duck appears, without permission from rights holder. Beyond the copying of the Donald Duck character itself, the publication features text content that must be considered an infringement of the copyright for Donald Duck. On behalf of the Danish Disney Company, I hereby demand you A. Immediately withdraw all copies of your blah 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 publication, B. immediately cease further printing, publication, or distribution of blah blah blah, anything that involves the Arne Duck character. C. Blah blah blah, never depict anything that looks like Donald Duck or any other Walt Disney character or anything that violates Disney copyright. Now, as anyone would when contacted by lawyers representing one of the most powerful corporations on Earth, Christensen and his publisher took this legal threat quite seriously, and they contacted an expert on copyright issues who advised them that the Arne Anka series would have to be terminated immediately. But neither Christensen nor his publisher Eddie Pruckle were particularly enthusiastic about that prospect. So Christensen suggested a page that would allow Arne Anka to escape Disney's threats. Although this is just the first of 2 parts to this story, and it's that second part that is just so delicious. But, well, we'll get there. But the new page depicts what appears to be Arne Anka getting crushed by a 1-ton weight, sarcastically and appropriately labeled Walt Disney Company, after he supposedly was walking along the docks and was the victim of a horrific crane accident. Popular European comics characters attend his funeral, which it's just funny to me that in a comic published to escape the claws of copyright lawyers, you involve multiple other rights holders. But anyway, it's revealed that Arne is in fact not dead and is attending his own funeral. You see, this whole thing was a planned operation. Under the 1-ton weight was a trap door covered in tomatoes in order to simulate blood splatter. Arne escaped through the trap door and made his way to an underground lab run by Alexander Barks, where some of the world's best plastic surgeons worked for hours to give Arne's controversial looks a makeover. He then emerges with a completely different looking beak, and his name is suddenly no longer Arne Duck, but Arne X. So I mean, who even knows what kind of animal he is now? Certainly not a duck. For about a year, Arne then appears weekly as Arne X with his new beak, and, you know, it works pretty well, although some of the characters in the comic itself, as well as many of the readers, miss his old look. And this is where this brilliant scheme really delivers that final payoff. You know, in art school, I took this great creative writing class, and our professor told us about this writing prompt that I think is like a pretty well-known writing exercise, and it's called Write Yourself Out of a Paper Bag. Here's someone on Reddit attempting it. Basically, it's just a riff on the common phrases like, he couldn't punch his way out of a paper bag, said about bad boxers, or she couldn't act her way out of a paper bag, said about bad actors. So the idea is, you know, write yourself out of a paper bag. You know, imagine you are inside a paper bag, and now write from that POV and come up with an interesting way out. And that's kind of what Charlie Christensen, aka Alexander Barks, does. And as usual around this time of the day, he went out into the hall to scan through fan mail. Hi Arne, we think you're super funny, but you were super funnier with the old beak. How can you yield to imperialist swines like Disney? Are you a coward? Your new beak is so sellout. Even his mom hates the new beak. And for God's sake, ditch that dumb beak you've put on lately. What kind of nonsense is that? Is this a modern thing or... But dear mom, it's Walt Disney who's forcing me to not look like I actually do. It's the artist's fault, all of it. How the hell can someone be so slow to think they can make a pastiche out of childhood heroes of American origin without consequence? How blue-eyed, naive, and nostalgic can someone be? On the other hand, that old beak did fit me like a glove. I feel like my poetic features came more to the fore with it. Is there no way to get my noble duck looks back without judicial meddling? After all, I was born in a duck pond. The solution revealed itself as Arne completely randomly passed a novelty store. Arne bought a beak mask. The idea was simple but genius. Now he could look like his American idol without getting accused of plagiarism. And anytime Disney's spies showed their ugly faces, he could just remove the beak. He kept the receipt for his taxes. So yeah, that's how Arne X became Arne An once again, or Arne Duck if you will, and escaped the clutches of Disney's lawyers. After this, we occasionally see Arne from the back with a thin line around his head to show the rubber band holding the new beak mask in place. A subtle reminder to the reader, and I guess to any lawyers out there, that his very Donald Duck-like beak is not actually how he looks. He's just wearing a costume. And, he can take that off anytime he wants, so no issues here, right?